Okay, I think we can get started. My name is Steffi Diaz, co-chair of our Childcare for Connecticut's Future. Before we get started, let's go through some quick instructions, for the evening, to make sure everyone has an opportunity to participate in this call. It's being actually translated in Spanish, and to activate
Steffi, the interpretation has not been activated yet.
Okay, so I will do English and Spanish then, okay? And then we can go ahead. So once again, hello everyone. Nuevamente, buenas tardes a todos. My name is Steffi Frias. Mi nombre es Steffi Frias. I'm co-chair of Childcare for Connecticut's Future. Co-presidenta del Childcare for Connecticut's Future. Before we get started, let's go through some quick instructions. And like I was mentioning, we want everyone to participate. So we would like to translate this call live in Spanish. Como había mencionado, queremos que todos puedan participar esta noche, que puedan dar su opinión, y queremos por esa razón que la llamada sea traducida en español en vivo. So to activate interpretation, please go to your Zoom toolbar below or above and select interpretation. Para activar la interpretación, por favor, vaya a su caja de herramientas debajo o arriba y seleccione interpretación. So we ask that English speakers also select a language setting. Así que pedimos que también los que hablan inglés escojan un tipo de lenguaje. So if you do not select a language, whether it's English or Spanish, you will not be able to hear the interpretation of a speaker who speaks a different language than you. So si no escogen un lenguaje, sea español o inglés, no va a poder escuchar la interpretación cuando uno de los que esté hablando hable un idioma diferente que usted. So again, please right now go ahead in your toolbar and select the language that you prefer listening to for this meeting. So nuevamente, por favor, vaya a su caja de herramientas y elija el lenguaje que usted prefiere escuchar para esta reunión. And a reminder that when you are speaking, please refrain from talking too quickly. If you need to help, if you need actually help, you can use the chat to connect with one of the CCFCT staffers. And we are in a live Zoom meeting. We ask that you ask questions and make comments live on camera or through and you can raise your hand, your virtual hand, for us to follow you. Así que un recordatorio cuando estemos hablando, por favor.
En el día de hoy estamos aquí para hablar sobre nuestra salud mental.
Ok, por favor, refrénese de hablar en alto, no en alto, muy rápido. Si usted necesita ayuda, puede utilizar el chat y puede hablar con uno de nuestros staff de CCFCT. Y también, como estamos en una llamada en vivo de Zoom, si usted tiene alguna pregunta, por favor, levante su manita virtual para que así pueda hacer su pregunta o su comentario en vivo. Okay, so once again, let's get started. Hopefully, let me know, Eva, if interpretation
is working, Stephanie. We're good to go.
We're good to go? We're okay. So, all right, so let's get started. Good evening, everyone. Like I mentioned, my name is Steffi Frias, and I co-chair with Alex Javon, Childcare for Connecticut's Future. Thank you all for attending this evening, especially before a holiday weekend. I know many of you have a lot of your plates, but we are really excited to see many of you prioritize this meeting tonight. Tonight's conversation will be in 3 sections. First, we have a very special guest, Commissioner Beth Bai. The commissioner will be presenting the governor's Blueprint Panel's 5-year plan. She will also be followed by Meryl Gay, who will discuss the next steps and walk us through the legislative process. And then we will close with our coalition director, Eva Bermudez-Zimmerman, to talk about the coalition's recommendations and how we can actually grow a plan besides the Blue Ribbons Panel's recommendation. I think it is extremely important to say that Childcare for Connecticut's Future supports the Blue Ribbon Panel's final plan before we go into the details of what it is in the plan and how it can go forward further. So let's welcome onto the screen Commissioner Beth Bai. Commissioner, thank you for agreeing to be on our call tonight. Before you show us what is in the plan, tell us please a little bit about what you got there. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much, Steffi. I so appreciate you and your leadership and Childcare for Connecticut's Future. You said I was a special guest. I don't feel that way. I feel like we have an incredible early childhood community and advocacy community in Connecticut, that 100 people are here on a very busy week for many folks, especially folks who are taking care of children and families and have their own children and families. So I'm really honored to be here. And I think one of the things that sets Connecticut apart when I talk to commissioners from around the country is our advocacy coalition. And the Blue Ribbon Panel process was one of the most humbling processes of my whole career working in public policy, because the turnout was amazing and the input really made a big difference. And I've been in the field for almost 40 years now. And listening to you all really gave me such important perspective. And it doesn't just happen. It happens because people work hard to communicate that there are hearings like this. It happens because people drive half an hour late at night, join Zoom calls, and things like that. So as I bring this plan to you, I bring it to you with humility and gratitude for your help. Now, it's a little different tonight than it's been because, first of all, for those of you listening to me for the 14th time, I really appreciate you being here. And I know it might sound repetitive. And for those of you listening to this plan the first time, thank you for being here. I hope you are as energized as the folks here for the 14th time to keep working to improve childcare for Connecticut and help Connecticut provide a roadmap for the nation for this work. Before I get started, I want to say one of my favorite things about some of the media coverage that happened with the Blue Ribbon Panel plan is that you never know what the media is going to pick up on. But I was really grateful that in terms of my comments, the media picked up on my comments in my letter to the Blue Ribbon Panel to say, this is social justice work, and that the inequities that early childhood faces are grounded in racial and gender inequities that exist across our society, and that a real goal of this plan is to address those inequities as they impact the quality of childcare in Connecticut. And they really impact parents' ability to access the childcare they need to both support their children and to support their families. Because any of us who are parents on this call know that parenting is a partnership. Whether your child is 1-year-old or 18-year-old and at their first year in college, we rely on other adults. And what we're trying to build is a more supportive community. So I'm so grateful that for my office, Eloisa Melendez is here. Eloisa was really a great partner with me in the outreach efforts. And I know many of you know Eloisa, and she's going to share the screen. And I'm going to stop going on now and get to the meat of the matter, get to the plan. And as far as tonight goes, we're not in the listening mode now. I'm in the mode of bringing you the plan that we've developed based on feedback. And we've brought that plan to the governor. We are bringing that plan to the public. And it's asking me to confirm my language. So some of you may have that on your screen. Just confirm what language you want to speak in. So bringing it to the governor, bringing it to the public, who you are in the field. And then we're starting to meet with legislators. So we're bringing the plan out. And then I know Meryl's going to talk to you about the legislative process. And then you're all going to work on and listen to the Childcare for Connecticut's future response. I will not be responding to that because I am with the plan right now is the plan. And then with the office of the governor, we'll be bringing, a plan to the legislature. And so right now, my plan is what the governor's plan is from heretofore. Now that we've brought him our Blue Ribbon Panel plan and priorities. And I'm sorry if that's dull. I just want to get our sort of different roles. Your role's different than my role. Your role is to listen to the plan, and then you'll have your own advocacy efforts that will be independent of my efforts working with the governor to move this plan forward. So I hope that makes sense. Eloise, did I cover that okay? Okay, let's go with the PowerPoint. So some of you were on the call with the Early Childhood Alliance, and this is Eloise is just getting the right settings, but this is the report from the Blue Ribbon Panel. This is a version from December 20th. So here we are. So this is what I was talking about before. I'm not going to go through all the numbers, but this wasn't just a process to write a plan. This was a process to put ideas out there, get feedback, change the plan, and come up with a final plan that you see before us. And I've already thanked you so much for your efforts. And much thanks to Philanthropy for outreach to parents, et cetera. So on the Blue Ribbon Panel, the four goals that we walked away with, the top goal, number one, heard across listening sessions, was that the workforce was key and the quality was important, and that those two are intermingled. I will say, if you read the report, we have some important feedback, that workforce is first and quality is part of that, but quality is bigger than just the workforce. And you'll see in some of the recommendations that while those two are listed here together, they're also separate. The other is that to make sure that care is available equitably, basically, that high quality programs are available to families and that they meet family needs. You might have the best program that's affordable for families, but maybe none of it's available for parents that have a child with a disability, or it's not available at the hours that families need it. That's not equitable and affordable access. So this is a really far-reaching and important goal. The third goal is systems, that our current systems are inflexible, and there's a lot of bureaucracy and burdens in there. As a former state-funded school readiness provider, I can tell you that I know we can do better, and I know things aren't necessarily that much better, 5 years into my term. This is something that has to be a real focus, is improving our approach, and also helping programs be more economically viable by making our systems work better. An example of this, I'm sure we have some on the call, we're into our second cohort of 500 providers helping us get a OEC 360. That is a system where you just come in once to OEC, and it's in there, you have doors to all the different systems, instead of childcare directors having to get into the registry, the background check system, the early ECE reporter, 211. Just, that's an example of where our current systems make your job much harder if you're a provider. So fixing the systems. And goal 4, which really things rest on, is having a well-funded, sustainable early childhood system that's ready for future investments. Okay, next step, next slide. And, this is really preaching to the choir, but sometimes for those of you that have been in this fight since the mid-90s, when we first got these brain scans, it showed how important those early years were and how many connections in the brain were happening in those first 3 years of life. We've really taken time in the report to make the case for early brain development and why it's so important to have high quality care in these early years. And then also really made the point in the report that childcare workers are not appropriately compensated, given how important these years are and how critical this work is. And in fact, they have been subsidizing the system for parents and really for programs as well by their foregone wages. So we took time to really point this out in the report. Next slide. One thing, I'm so grateful for Governor Lamont's leadership, and he has been super engaged. And those of you, I think, Steffi and Ava were with him recently when we visited Maria Amato's family child care home. He talks a lot about the workforce piece of it, that in fact, having childcare available is very important for the workforce. But he always also says when he sees kindergarten teachers, they can tell him that they know when children have had a high quality preschool, and that he knows that it makes a really big difference. And I know he was really taken on his visit to that program with all the educational materials that were available to young children. And so he really understands the brain development piece, but to him as governor, he's really worried about our economy, and Connecticut needs 90,000 more workers. And this plan proposes a model that would bring 20,000 more women into the workforce. And so that's important to the governor, because there aren't many ways to get 20,000 workers into the workforce. And when the state is short workers, we're losing out on many things, including economic development, just the general economy in the state, and also taxes that come when people are working versus taking services. So Connecticut has a gender gap that's the largest in New England. So you see that when before people have children or after they have children, the workforce participation among men and women is just about the same. But when you look at men and women with children under 6, female labor participation really goes down. I always note on this slide that male participation goes up. So I just find that funny. But it's just, it is the way the data works out. So we know that childcare is part of the reason that women are out of it's a big part of the reason why women are out of the labor force during this time. So the report's really making a broad-based case for why investing in childcare is important. It's not just about childcare, it's about our whole state economy. Okay, next slide. When we talk about Connecticut, we have to understand that Connecticut's in really a national culture. And though the United States has taken a number of runs at funding early childhood ed, I saw a document recently when I was visiting a museum in Hyde Park that showed a 1929 letter from Eleanor Roosevelt explaining why a bill hadn't passed Congress that would have kept supporting maternal infant health and childcare. So we have missed many opportunities from the 20s. There was another opportunity, well, in the 40s, we really ramped up childcare during World War II, but then it all went away after the war. And then, so over the course of our culture, we've just never made that investment, but that's not the case for most industrialized nations. So when you look at where the United States is compared to most industrialized nations, we are not investing nearly the amount of our GDP as other nations, and it shows. And so states are sort of left with this challenge of what do we do? Because right now, most families rely on the only parent or both parents working. Next slide. So I also think it's important to put the investments that have been made in
Commissioner,
context. Yep.
sorry to,
Am I going too fast?
just to slow down a little
Okay.
bit,
Sorry.
little bit.
I get excited when I talk about the history and how many chances we've had and how many times Congress and the presidents have not summoned the will to take care of our youngest children and families. One thing I said when I was on a panel a couple weeks ago was I was part of a cohort of early childhood educators in Salzburg, and we spent a whole day at a German research institute learning about their early childhood research about child outcomes in early childhood. And with people from 35 countries, I said, you know, I raised my hand at the end of the presentation and said, well, how did you make the case that your country should invest in early childhood like this? I asked the German Research Institute, and he looked at me like, what? What do you mean? There are children. And I looked around the table, and every country was looking at me like, huh? What? So, you know, it can be hard to understand. So I get worked up when I look at how well other countries are doing and how slow our nation has been to respond, because For this to work, it's going to have to take state investments and federal investments. And I wanted to show this slide because as the Blue Ribbon panel looked at what's happened over the past 6 years, you can see that childcare investments have gone up both at the state and the federal level. And this chart shows the increase in funding for childcare related expenses. And it's going up significantly. I do want to make the point that the 23 to 25 numbers are appropriated funds. That's how much did we budget? Whereas the 2019 to 2022 lines are audited. How much did we spend? Because, you know, even this year we've appropriated a certain amount of money, but not every slot, for example, every slot in a state funded center is filled. So, you know, we don't always spend all that's appropriated, but you can see that Governor Lamont's commitment and the legislature's also been incredibly supportive, have seen the largest increases, certainly in my time as a child care advocate. And it has been both state and federal over this period of time. Next slide. So now to get down into some of the details. When we talk about workforce and quality, I thought I'd just take a minute to explain, because one question that I'm getting a lot is, how will you get to support improved compensation? And when we say professional compensation, we are talking about, and it says this in the report, you know, on par with public school teachers. And it's like, well, how do you get there? And the way that we propose to get there in the panel proposes is that happens by increasing rates, both for Care for Kids and in state funded rates. But also, if you look over the 5 years, and I'll show you, you'll see at the end how that happens a little bit, significant expansion of Care for Kids, so that right now, families at 60% of SMI, state median income, can qualify for Care for Kids. The plan proposes to go to 100%. So there'd be tens of thousands more families who would have certificates to be able to afford formal child care, and the rates would be going up at the same time. That's what makes the plan so expensive, is you can't expand access without increasing rates, because you can't have a workforce. We have closed classrooms across the states. You cannot have a workforce unless you increase the rate. So it's got to be both expansion of access and expansion of rates. And those two things together help much more of the system than just the state funded spaces, because then Care for Kids becomes more available, for example, in more communities, and then more families have it. So it's both the rates, Care for Kids expansion, and then something that really came through in the hearings was that the stabilization for programs had to continue. So the plan proposes stabilization payments continuing for 70% of programs in the state of Connecticut, you know, that programs really serving any families with high needs. So that is how that's how you get to the increased compensation. So that just came up in the Child Care Alliance. So I want to explain the pathway or the thinking behind how do you get to improved compensation. We also suggest some strategies that are being piloted now, like apprenticeship, the child care incubator, our workforce pipeline projects, high school CDA, really opening up more pathways into the field. I visited a classroom at Tunxis Community College, and there were 8 students, and I had them each tell me how they got interested. 6 of them got interested by their high school child development class. And we just don't have that across the state in enough districts. So we're suggesting there are a lot of ways to increase the pathways, but none of that will matter if you don't get the wages up. You know, no matter how attractive, if people can't make a living, it doesn't work. But all of it together. We also, I think one of the most groundbreaking things is we talk about simplifying the credentialing process. adopting a 3-step career ladder with meaningful differences in the steps that are correlated with increases in pay. And that would also hold across state lines. So that's a significant shift. And then also strategies to improve the quality of programs. And this is another cross-program strategy, is having grants available for coaches to build coaches in programs, not to send coaches to programs, but to have cohorts supporting teachers that want to be coaches within the programs where they're working, and stipends. So we know we have Elevate and we have a quality improvement system, but we also know, we heard from directors, we need help. We're bringing on new staff all the time. We need help coaching. And rather than build a whole system of coaches like many states have done, we heard from programs that we need help in our own programs. We could nurture our teachers to be coaches and support their professional development and give them a little more money. And build capacity across the system. So that's another thing that would be available to all programs. Next slide. Equitable and affordable access. I talked already about expanding access for low and middle income families, both through Care for Kids, and also really reminding state-funded programs that 40% of the children in their program can be families that make over 75% of the state median income, to encourage some mixed income models. I think, Head Start and school readiness and child daycare have a big difference. Some are all serving all low income and some are serving a mix. But the idea is just really working to try to open up access for all kinds of families, with the majority of the help going to families with high needs. But we know it can help programs' fiscal stability if they take in full pay parents as well, all in all. So the mix can really help. A problem that came up again and again and again was a lack of access of reliable childcare for parents of children with disabilities, and the public school system that's just not working for most families. So that is another item but working with the State Department of Ed and school districts, we hope to address in this plan. And then making sure that in the highest need communities and most under-resourced communities, that we focus equitable access there, that families have access. And we're doing things like parent ambassadors, that is paying parents to be out there talking to other parents about available childcare in their neighborhoods. And we really know Eastern Connecticut is an area that has twice the access problem of any other region in the state. So how do we address that? Next slide. This just shows you, what does it do for a family when you open up Care for Kids to families living at 75% of the state median income, 85% of the state median income, and 100% of the state median income. And this is where you get some of the return on investment in childcare. If families have access to a childcare voucher, this puts like $25,000 in that family's pocket. They can afford a house. They can afford transportation, perhaps. They can pay off their student loans if they have those. These are real game changers. I don't want to read through the whole chart, but I highlighted the lines that show if a family, making $80,000 paid 7% of their income for childcare, they are now paying $31,000 for childcare. And now they'd get $25,000 basically back in their pocket. So this we sort of grounded in the Alice report, which has been helpful. I should really also thank SVP, who was a big part of a lot of these analyses and helped us take a new look, as did social finance. Our federal preschool development grant brought us a lot of resources as well. But this is giving families so much money in their pocket, and you know how much families are struggling right now to make ends meet. Next slide. And then the systems objective one is to 3A is to simplify the state-funded system and better align with federal systems to reduce complexity and increase utility. One example of this is simply like aligning the parent fee schedule. Why are we making programs, work with parents and have all these different ways of calculating what the parent fee is? So that's one way. The other way is just not to have programs that have a classroom with students funded from 3 different funding streams and needing to do all those different reports. So just have a single state funded system. We've done a lot of work over the years to align child daycare and align school readiness and align our Head Start wraparound. But these could really all work together to be a single state funded system. The other piece I'll focus on is we really want to make sure that built into our process of community needs assessment and that building the system of feedback about community need, that families are at the table and have a voice in that. Our data systems are really not at all where they need to be. So that's another priority, because as we have good data, then we can assign resources based on need. And we can also see, what's working in terms of child outcome and how can we work more collaboratively with the public schools and that kinds of things. And then 3B I didn't speak to, but this is about innovations, looking at ways to innovate to help strengthen the business models for childcare programs. And I talked about reducing the administrative burdens many times. So next slide. The funding objectives are to move from a system that pays what we can to a system that pays based on the cost of care. Right now, the feds make us do a market-based survey, but where the market isn't really working, that doesn't reflect the real cost of care. So over the 5 years to shift to a cost of care model, change the way that we calculate the cost of care. I talked about developing a flexible fiscal model. So, for example, if we paid by classroom, then programs could have some families that come 3 day a week, some that come 2 day a week, some that come, some you could even get to the point where you had morning and afternoon. I don't think that'll happen, but not all families go to the office 5 days a week anymore. So to just allow programs to fill a classroom, not pay by person, as an example, make the system less demanding and fund in a way that is more sustainable for programs. If you pay by the classroom, programs don't have the in and out of a child leaving and coming and losing a couple months revenue because a family moves. And while this is a problem everywhere, again, in rural parts of the state, when a program loses a child, it just takes longer to fill that. And that's why I think those programs have a harder time there. And then 4C is something that the panel did not weigh in on how, but made a claim, and Childcare for Connecticut's Future presented to me and showed what other states were doing. The idea is that we need a sustained funding stream that is an early childhood funding stream. And so that was a panel recommendation that the states that have done this successfully have identified a funding stream. Next slide. So this is, sort of, this is where the Connecticut Mirror had the headline. The plan was a $2 billion plan for early childhood. What we have is we have a five-year plan here. Really, you see 6 years reflected, but from fiscal 24, from fiscal 25 to fiscal 29, you can see the blue ribbon financial recommendations on, I think it's your left, it's my left, so I assume it's your left. And then on the right, you see how many more families would have access to affordable care. So as I said, the idea is you're bringing up rates and bringing up access, and there'd be a 60% increase in the number of spaces that were subsidized by federal, state, and local funding. So when people say to me, what about the non-state funded programs, when would be in year 5, there would be far less programs that would have no children who are benefiting from state subsidy in some way or another, because you have a 60% increase in the whole system. So that's that. The other thing I'll say is if you look at the plan on the left, the first year especially is about stabilization and system building, getting ready for the growth. And then that's very purposeful because we're heading into a second year of a 2-year budget that's set. So the idea is in the first year, we do some of the hard things legislatively. There are some investments, as you can see, that they're not insignificant. I think it's 147 million or in that range in the first year. Governor Lamont has already funded, next year will go in, and the legislature, I should never give the legislature short shrift because they're a huge part of this, about 50 million more year over year in fiscal year 25 compared to 24. But this plan talks about incrementally more investment over that. So stabilization and system building. So stabilization starts and then goes down over the years. And then the expansion continues, but you can sort of see the line flattening. Next slide. So we thanks to SVP and CBIA and Department of Labor and Ready Nation, we did some very specific and I would say very conservative estimates about the impact of this plan on the Connecticut economy. And you can see, we know from just from the data that by having access to childcare, we won't lose 7,000 parents who are currently in the workforce who'd be likely to leave without healthcare. That's worth 1.4 billion to the state. And some of it's tax revenue that goes right back into the general fund. We also know there'd be, we said over the 5 years, it'd be by the end of the 5 years, our estimate is there'll be 20,000 new working mothers. We really, working with SVP, wanted to be conservative in this estimate and say, okay, even if we got only 15,000 more working mothers in the workforce, that adds 2.9 billion to the state's economy, 225 of that straight in tax revenue, $2.7 billion boost to the Connecticut GDP. And we also know that when parents have reliable childcare, that they're more valuable employees. And that has a $216 million value. So the benefit to cost ratio of this plan, this is, to be clear, this is just year 5. I wasn't really clear about that. So when you're looking at this 1.4 billion, 2.9 billion, 216 million, that would be the impact just in year 5. And so the cost of year 5 looks really high. It's like $603 million in that range. But the benefit is a 7.4 to 1 benefit to the state economy. The panel kept asking us questions about the return on investment. And there are a lot of national numbers out there that we hear all the time. Like James Heckman says 13%. But thanks to the work of SVP, they really took a lot of time and tried to get this right. And we urge them to be conservative. Now, none of that even includes all the things that early childhood educators talk about as the benefit, which is when you support young children's brain development, we know that there are fewer costs later on down the line in special education and repeating grades, and later in really expensive social programs. And for the year 5 cohort, for that same group of children over their lifetime, the savings is $7.5 billion. So I thought you all would like this slide, because this is something a lot of you have talked to me about. And I'm going to stop there because of time, Eloisa, so we can just take this down. And I don't I don't know if you have questions, if y'all have questions, or if you just want to move into Merrill, because I know time is short. I guess I went a little longer than I thought I would, sorry.
I
I'm so
think we should
excited.
go into
Yeah.
Merrill. I
Okay,
think that makes more sense.
okay.
But thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for being so thorough and for all the time that you, the panelists, took to develop these plans. I think it is to be noted once more, and I think Steffi mentioned it, that the CCFCT, Child Care for Connecticut's Future Coalition, does support the plan. We just know that, we have other opinions of how we can go further, but we do support the plan, and that is undoubtedly. So, Meryl, we'll pass it over the mic to you, and thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, so now the governor has a plan. What happens next? In a democracy, governors don't have ultimate power. They have power, but not ultimate power. So what happens next is that this goes to the legislature, and it goes in the form of proposed bills to make some of those changes that Commissioner Bai talked about and what they had to do to fix the system. And it'll go to the legislature in the form of a budget proposal. Now, the legislature can also introduce their own things, and they frequently have different ideas of what they want to do. But all of that then, because this is a short session of the legislature, every bill has to get introduced by a committee. Then after the committee has decided which bills they're going to raise for a hearing, they hold public hearings on them. That's a time when all of us can weigh in. We get 3 minutes to talk. You can submit longer written testimony, but that's the time when the legislature sort of officially hears from the public about things. Then the committee will decide, are we going forward with the bill as it's written, or are we making a modification? Are we amending it? Once the committee has decided, all right, these are the bills we're going to send forward, they go back to the chamber of the legislature where the bill originated, whether it's a House or a Senate bill. Then it may get sent to another committee, but eventually it gets brought back to the floor, and a committee of legislators decides which bills are going to get brought for a vote on the floor. It has to get passed in exactly the same wording in both chambers of the legislature. Sometimes, the House will pass something, it'll go to the Senate, and then the Senate will want to change something, and then it has to go back to the House to get passed in concurrence with the Senate before it goes to the governor to get signed. So it's a complicated process, and that's the simple version of it, because layered on top of that is all of the backroom politics, all of the various interest groups trying to get their thing into something, and lots of competing interests. Particularly in a short session, there just isn't very much time. And so you end up with big, important things battling for time to debate the bill and have a vote in the last weekend of the session. And the reality is that most of the bills that pass in that last week or even that last weekend of the session. So there's a lot of work going forward to get this bill or this per plan put into place. And I think all of us would like to see this plan as the first step towards an even bigger proposal, but I'll let Ava talk about that. So there are going to be a lot of different competing interests for money and for time and attention at the legislature. We are going to need all of you to help raise the importance of this issue for legislators and keep on them to make sure that they actually get something passed. I remember when we were trying to create the Office of Early Childhood the first time around, that first year when we all thought it was going to pass, everybody agreed it was great, we're going to pass it. It didn't pass because of a backroom deal. So we need to really stay on this and really make sure that our elected officials understand the importance of this, how big a problem this is for parents and providers across the state. So unless there are questions about the process, the legislative session starts on the first Wednesday of February. So there is still time between now and then for you to set up a time to talk to your legislators before they get really busy. And then there will be times during the session where you can, got something asking me what my language is. So there'll be times during that session, particularly the hearings, where you can weigh in. But it's really important that we be calling legislators, writing to legislators, and making sure that they understand how important this problem is and why we need to solve it. So
Thank
back
you,
to you.
Meryl. I'll take it. We're running. I request 10 more minutes since we started a little late from folks. If you can bear with us for an additional 10 minutes, that'd be fantastic. So we can go ahead and review some key components from CCFCT. So what we did, as I mentioned earlier when the commissioner was on, we do completely support the plan that the Blue Ribbon Panel and the Office of Early Childhood endorsed with the Governor's Blue Ribbon Panel. That is not in question here. But we are an advocacy organization, and we worked with the commissioner and the Blue Ribbon panelists to hold listening sessions throughout the state. A big part of our mission statement is to make sure that we incorporate and listen to parent voices and provider voices equally. What that means is every single day we're talking to you. We have, the opportunity to really focus on some further ideas that you told us need to be incorporated into the legislature's plan on how to change early care and education completely. Something robust, something that's transformational. I'm sure you've also heard us say the word bold. We use it often because right now, as the system stands, we're not being bold enough, right? We're leaving inadvertently people behind because we're not taking the full step forward to fully fund the early care and education system. So before you go off to your holiday break and, unwind and enjoy some well-deserved time off, we wanted you to really give a second, look at all the different ideas that we incorporated in the plan from your voice, from your perspective. And, we're going to present this plan throughout the next 3 months to legislators and make sure that they really, truly understand from your voice what you want to see change. So I'm going to go ahead and share our plan. So we can take a look at it. The doc right now that I put into the chat is the Spanish version, and I'll go and add the English version as well. It's a bit.ly just to make it easier to open and to share. So if you share this link with any friends or family members, they should be able to access it. It's CCF, if anyone's writing it down, CT, and then it's papers 2023. And then now it's on the chat, so you can be able to see it right now in live time. Okay, so let me share my screen. Believe I'm sharing. Okay, so this is our response paper, and because we don't have enough time tonight to go page by page, our document is not as lengthy as the state of Connecticut's, as it should be, right? Our document's about 17 pages, but what we did to help you navigate through our process and through the different goals that the Blue Ribbon Panel had in mind, again, because we are supporting those goals, At the end of the day, they are in alignment with the different ideas that parents and providers vocalize throughout the year to the panel, to us as a coalition. So we took those goals, those main 4 pillars of how to tackle education, workforce development, sustainability, funding, and access. We then separated into those same categories. And then we said, well, this is in addition to what's presented by the state of Connecticut, this is how we can go further, right? This is how we can take a little step further from that place. And in the next few years, while legislators meet and talk about how much money they're going to put into the system, don't forget these key components. Again, I'm not going to read verbatim the document. Our document's about 17 pages, but I'm going to walk you through and point out some other additional details that we thought were very important to incorporate. The one detail I will add as a caveat, yesterday we had our Childcare for Connecticut's Future Coalition had a leadership retreat, and we were brainstorming legislative ideas, talking through next steps. And one topic that came about in a handful of meetings and breakouts was transportation. This plan, as you see it right now, did not incorporate transportation, but that does not mean that we are not supporting transportation for parents who have children in childcare spaces. In future plans, when we tweak and maybe update this plan going into 2025, that is something that we could incorporate. The other caveat that I think is very important to add, every idea on this document has been created by parents and providers. In the course of 2 years of the coalition existing, we've been having these monthly meetings. We've also had the opportunity to hold convenings in person. We've also done actions. We've done postcarding, asking parents and providers to write their stories. So between the meetings and conversations that we've done, including the actions and the opportunities to do storytelling, we've incorporated those ideas into this plan, into our details. Okay. So I'm going to skip my introduction letter because more or less you heard that from me. For those who are not familiar with me, I should have added, my name is Eva Bermudez Zimmerman. I'm the Childcare for Connecticut's Future Coalition Director. So such a pleasure sharing the space with all of you and talking about the ideas about how we're going to further childcare and make sure that we have true funding for cost of care. So in our executive summary, the main bullet points, main takeaways that we want to hone in and ensure that legislators understand: the cost of care is not enough with just the Blue Ribbon Panel recommendations. We want to go further. We need them to go further. That means that from the $148 million that's currently being proposed in the Blue Ribbon Panel recommendations, we would like to go further and pay for the true cost of care. Approximately through the state of Connecticut and other organizations nationwide trying to calculate what is the true cost of care and how much money do you need to infuse currently into the childcare system. That number is about 1.5 billion. It could go higher depending on how many more services you need to add or you would like to add. So as a coalition, as it stands, we are proposing that we go as far as that 1.5 billion and beyond. Many of you who have been involved with us in the last 2 years know that in our first and second year of legislative proposal, we were asking legislators to fund $700 million in emergency funding to stabilize early education, make sure that the workforce was keeping their doors open, but also find some respite and relief for parents from the amount of money that they are dishing out. So from that 148, Our proposal is money that goes in addition to that. So of course, we want the 148 that the commissioner is proposing. Who wouldn't want that? We just want to make sure that the OEC has more funding and they have more structure to get the job done and get it done, right. The other highlight that I think is really important in our proposal is that when we're talking about paying providers, we want to make sure that they're getting paid beyond what their current market rate is. So in internal conversations of providers, and you ask them, what is true compensation? How do you want to get paid? In the past, the language that was used was a livable wage, a livable salary. Basically, what livable means is, hey, you should be able to make enough money in your job to pay your bills, raise your family. In this case, in early education, as a coalition, livable is not enough. We want parity with other educational workers with the hours that the workforce works. What that means is, if you're a childcare provider and you're working a 55, 60-hour work week or beyond, some providers, they perform non-traditional care. So they might be caring for a child as early as 5 a.m. and caring for a child up to as late as 11 p.m. We have nurses who need childcare. We have factory workers here in the state of Connecticut who need childcare. Maybe you're someone who works at Electric Boat and you work second shift. So when we're talking about those long hours, in addition to the educational component of providing care, we want to make sure that those providers are getting paid what they're actually worth. Part of that payment in our proposal, we also want to make sure that we take in consideration how they get paid, and that how really does matter. If you right now infuse the early care system with a whole bunch of money and you put it into the child care subsidy program, Care for Kids, but you don't make it universal, right? Let's say that not everyone qualifies for Care for Kids. Only a certain percent of the state of Connecticut qualifies for Care for Kids, just like the program exists right now. And you add more money into that system. If you get it to 50% of the state of Connecticut or families get access to Care for Kids, it doesn't necessarily shoot out a scenario that providers are able to make more money. Providers, if they're counting on a state subsidy and not every parent gets the access to that subsidy, they could see a small bump up in that program and then in turn be able to use that money to make some changes, pay higher salaries for their employees, maybe even have some savings. But not every provider currently uses the Care for Kids subsidy, and not every provider has the ability, even if you add more money into Care for Kids, to use that extra money to really feel like they're surviving. So we want to go beyond that. We want to make sure that providers are getting paid the market rate, comparable to other educators, getting paid for the true hours that they work, and make sure that whatever delivery system the state decides on how to give them raises ensures real raises, not just a group of providers, quote unquote, the nonprofit providers versus the private pay. If you're reading the page as you see it right now, we do use the phrase private pay. Hopefully that's not too jargony for you, but private pay is what we usually call providers who take in parents that only pay money and do not qualify for a subsidy. Okay. Gonna walk through it real quickly here. Some key challenges that we saw as highlighted in the Blue Ribbon Panel report. Access is very difficult. Also making sure that we have the access is not just who is able to use care, but also the location, transportation, as I mentioned. Do you have transportation for childcare? Are you able to get to the childcare space that you prefer? So we really need to look at these solutions as a team. In our additional proposals, we do recommend that when having a conversation of making changes when it comes to money, infrastructure, any kind of new regulation, that the state of Connecticut incorporates the steering committee, the early childhood steering committee that has provider voices, advocate voices, and also incorporates the early childhood cabinet and parent cabinet. That is part, and it's worked in the plan. We want them to go a little step further and say that if there is a moment where money is involved that is directed to the actual provider and how the provider is going to get paid, it'd be great if the state of Connecticut could also incorporate those voices. So it's, again, going a little step further, doing a little nudge, saying, hey, we're working together already. Let's continue working together, because that's what we want to do. As I mentioned, then we go into a breakdown of the Blue Ribbon Panel's report section by section, discussing how we can make sure that we're going a little further when the legislature is convening and adding into the legislative bill details. So we want to, let me just fast forward here because I talked about financing and funding. Okay. And then it's going to stop here really quickly. So in the access goal, going back to the example of Care for Kids, the subsidy program, if legislators, if they keep as is the recommendation and they do infuse that 148 million, again, fantastic. We then ask them to, again, please make sure that we're going further than that, but also ask them to be very strategic, very thoughtful as to how you're going to give money to providers. So it's not a situation where just a certain group of providers are able to, use this for raises and then nobody else. The other request as well is on the parent side. For parents, we ask that we make sure that there's actual access to care when legislators are accepting these changes. If you're using the Care for Kids subsidy and you're only stopping at 38% expansion on that subsidy, you're leaving a lot of middle class families behind. So please consider and take in consideration that we need a lot more money, again, beyond that 148 million, going into that true cost of care 1.5 billion to really cover parents who are middle class, who are also hurting. So the programs that are being offered to parents shouldn't just be for low income parents. There should be options out there for parents who are middle class. For example, if you are a working parent in the state of Connecticut and you make that $104,000, through the current expansion and proposal, you could qualify for Care for Kids in a family of 3. But take into consideration, let's say you make $115,000 in a family of 3. You have to take in consideration student loans, take in consideration the cost of housing. There might be a possibility that both spouses are paying student loans. When you take into account all of those details in that family member's life, paying $23,000 for childcare is still very much unaffordable, very difficult, and puts a strain on their bank accounts, their pockets. So we really have to have a realistic conversation of like what these changes could do, how these changes could truly impact, and why we should go further than the current SMI model that's being offered, and just cap the cost of care at 7%. Okay, so to be cognizant of time, just to wrap it up here, because all of you have a copy of this document in the chat, and you can use the winter break to really review it. We, as a coalition, from the very beginning when we started, we always talked about their access and making sure that families truly had opportunities to reduce the cost of care. So we proposed a 7% cap, complete cap, no SMI requirement. So if the state of Connecticut decides to, go through with step 1, step 2, step 3 of the Blue Ribbon Panel's plan, that's great. Again, we're supporting the plan. We just hope that come subsequent years, 2025, or the next budget cycle, 2027, we can have real conversations about taking out the SMI cap, going to the 7%, and then adding additional funding into the cost of care to reduce it. I'm going to take this off screen really quickly so I can see you guys and have a heart-to-heart while we wrap up here. Okay, because I know a lot of cameras on. So what it comes down to, right? What it comes down to is we all know it's super expensive. And for providers out there, you know that you're hurting and you want to get paid more. The providers, there seems that there's a very clear pathway in the plan to get more money. But we're going to keep having the conversation with the commissioner and legislators to make sure how you get the money makes sense, right? Because the how definitely matters. It can't just be money through just grants. It has to be real money that feels like raises that you can really use. For the parent side of it, we heard you. There've been so many meetings of parents saying on these calls, well, if all you're giving me is maybe a few more dollars through Care for Kids, that's not enough. Or other parents saying, I don't take Care for Kids, I don't qualify for Care for Kids, there's nothing there for me. So as a coalition, the true heart-to-heart, we are supporting special needs, resources, that means curriculum support, real money for parents for curriculum support if you have a special needs child, real classes where you and your childcare provider can take them together and learn more about your special needs child. We're also proposing in real time in this proposal, making sure that if you're kinship care, maybe you're a grandparent caring for your grandson or granddaughter, we heard you. DCF doesn't necessarily dish out the kind of money that they give to a foster parent like they should to a grandparent. Power to the foster parents. It's amazing. It's a very hard job. But if you're a grandparent out there, if you're an aunt or an uncle out there, and you have a child and you need care and you need help, you shouldn't be boxed out of the system. If you're a parent, just like the example that I use, that has student loans, and you also need to get some help paying for care, you should also have an opportunity to be able to use the child care system here in the state of Connecticut and survive. If you're a parent and you are frustrated because you can't find a child care center, you can't get access, it's too far, there's not one near you. This is the real life conversations about how to make sure that there's a center or home-based provider that's available to you. If it's not possible to open a brand new space or a home, then let's figure out what transportation looks like. Let's figure out how to get you the resources near your job if that's more realistic. So I do hope that you take the time out, you look at it. We were very inclusive, extremely thoughtful in incorporating all those other details that we felt like were missing in the conversation. This document, there's no room for saying, this doesn't speak to me, this isn't for me. But like Meryl said, it doesn't just stop there. We all know that a lot of things can happen during the legislative session. We can start off very strong with a lot of great ideas. It took a lot of work to get here and research to figure out what we need. But to make sure that we end as strong as we started, We need all of your voices to be part of that conversation. We need to be bold. We need to be strong and keep up the conversations with legislators. So coming up in February, closer to the legislative session starting, we will be having a inclusion training followed with an advocacy training. So we're going to have a training talking about, how our different voices can come together and understand each other. And then we're going to go into how do you share your story during the legislative process, and how does lobbying look like as an advocate, right? How do you talk to someone who's elected? So we do hope to see you in our January and February meetings where we start digging into those details. We do hope that you feel that this plan honors you and honors your voices. And if you need, any comments, questions, or any feedback, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are over time, way over time. I'm happy to stay on for, another five minutes to answer any questions and take any comments, but I'll leave it over to you guys. Any feedback? Maria, you unmuted. Maria?
Can you hear me? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Tatiana. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. I know they were saying in the Blue Ribbon panel something about the education and the plan of obtaining either associate or a bachelor degree, but I came on late, so I didn't know if you discussed that, and is that a plan? Is that still in discussion for it?
So for home-based providers, the plan does not mandate any provider who's, again, home-based to have a bachelor's degree. As a coalition, we're also not proposing additional regulations on providers themselves. Our fear, so for parents on the call, we understand that high quality care has to happen. That's without a doubt. But our fear is if we start pumping into the system a whole bunch of new rules for the educators, and we haven't even gotten to a place where they get paid enough money to survive, then that's not cool. You can't have one without the other. So let's fix the system. Let's make sure that they're compensated. Let's make sure that they have salaries. Providers have salaries that they've earned. And if that then turns into a conversation about more money for being qualified, then great. The current plan does talk about quality QIS. So they took out the R out of the QIRS. So it's not a rating system. There are quality of improvements and classes, but specifically for home-based providers, there aren't any new mandates on education. And Meryl, you can chime in.
Okay, thank you, because that's what the fear of a lot of providers that I hear, and we already have shortage on childcare provider and a bunch of waiting lists. So my fear that they implement these demand and home-based providers, they're gonna force them to close their door, and that's why I wanted to make sure that when I get back to these providers that aren't on the meeting, I could relate to them like, okay, you know what, yes, and I could properly tell them more information about it. So that's why I asked that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. Any other
Disculpe,
questions?
¿puedo hablar? María
Oh,
Quintana.
yes, María Quintana. Go ahead, María.
María Quintana, ¿puedo hablar? Sí. Señorita, disculpe, yo hasta el día de hoy ya tuve mis audiencias que me llevaron por algunas razones que alguien exageró en mi daycare. No sé quién hizo esas llamadas, no lo entiendo hasta el día de hoy. Nunca llegué a saber quién es la tercera persona que llamó. Hablando mal de mi daycare, de lo cual yo tuve la audiencia, ya tuve las audiencias y estoy en la espera de la respuesta, qué decisión van a tomar con lo de mi daycare. Yo tengo yo ya tengo los certificados, todo para seguir continuando con el daycare. Y hasta ahora yo estoy trabajando actualmente con Care for Kids familiar nomás, porque tengo la licencia suspendida. Y hasta ahora no recibo tampoco los alimentos para los niños.
María, ¿cuál es tu pregunta?
hablan de muchos beneficios, pero hasta el día de hoy no, a mí se me han negado todos los derechos y los beneficios para los niños.
Maria wants to know that we've mentioned a lot of different benefits and provider resources that are accessible, but if your provider that's currently has their license on pause or is in a limbo, in a gray, maybe starting your child care process, or your license is suspended, there aren't any resources for those providers. The easiest answer, Maria, in the state's current plan, what they have is incentives to get new providers into educational classes or people who want to be providers. There's also grants that they offer to start up your business. But if you already started, and this is something that we did highlight in our own plan, if you already started, you already have a business, and you're 20 years in, you're 10 years in, for example, we do propose that there are grants. We also incorporated a recommendation that Angelica Cervantes mentioned in one of our meetings, that there should be loans, 0% interest loans for providers out there, so that they can access changes into their space. There should also be grants that are not just 1 or 2 or 3 years down the road and then it stops. There should be ongoing programs and grants for providers, a dedicated website just for provider grants, provider loans. So that way, when we're talking about 10 years down the road, when all your toys are broken, when all of your equipment needs to be updated, that you have access to money and access to options. If you're a provider who has a suspended license, or there's maybe a difficulty happening and you're just trying to figure out what's best for you, what's best for the families, those grants and those proposals usually don't really activate if you're in that limbo. It's usually most of the programs that exist now and the programs that are being proposed would only help and be available for providers who are active licenses. So it's not the answer you're looking for, but that is the reality that we're living in. The reason why the money is attached to an active license is because most of the state funding, there's a lot of regulations that go into, especially so
Bueno, como le
money,
digo,
an active, it's really hard to report. Okay.
como le digo, actualmente yo estoy trabajando todavía con Care for Kids porque tengo el permiso familiar de Care for Kids. ¿Aló? ¿Me escucha? ¿Aló?
Okay. So,
sí, yo actualmente tengo el permiso familiar de Care for Kids. Estoy trabajando con la familia nomás.
So I'm just gonna, because so we could definitely have a conversation offline, but because of the time, and I don't see any other hands raised at the moment, then I hope that we can continue this conversation. Everyone can have some time in the next month to look at the documents, including our proposals, and then we can start off our January meeting digging into our plan and seeing if we missed anything, and taking any new questions, because I know most of you did not have time to read the recommendations or our plan. So enjoy your holidays. If you celebrated Hanukkah, I hope you had a wonderful Hanukkah. If if there's not a holiday, then have a happy new year, and we'll see you in our January meeting. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Gracias.